I strongly believe that style is something that should not be fabricated or invented, but rather an organic evolution or rather an organic expression of the content. What I mean by that is I believe strongly in message over visual language. The story, the message, the actual content should be what drives the fine tuning of the visual language and making sure that language serves content and it's not arbitrary and artificial layered on top of content. I have oftentimes resorted to this analogy to like artisanal cheese where the crust of an aged wheel of cheese is very distinct, but it's the product of the ingredients that go into it, the aging process, humidity, temperature, you name it. So it's where uh, content meets context. It's where this crust, the surface forms, but in a very natural, organic way, as opposed to, commercially produced cheap cheese where, you know, God knows where the ingredients come from, and the marketing department in the other part of the country does research on the newest trends, and then they slap these colorful designs on plastic tubes, and then they inject this nondescript paste into the plastic colorful tubes and call it cheese. It's a completely different approach or a different relationship between the packaging, the surface, and the content itself. And I'm a big believer in this organic correlation between content and style.
Hello, welcome back to We Thought It Would Be Easy podcast, where we dive into the creative act across all kinds of interactive entertainment, from video games to comics, movies, basically anything that features your favorite creators making interesting things. I'm Jonathan Grant, game designer and developer, sometimes still. And I have with me legendary game designer Jordan Weisman. He's the creator of Shadowrun, Battletech, and many other IPs that you may or may not know of. He's going to introduce our guest for this week. We're really excited about this guest because he is the presence behind a bunch of really cool creative IPs. So take it away, Jordan.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I'm really excited to welcome Daniel Dociu to the show. Daniel and I, we've known each other for over 20 years now, but Daniel took a really unusual road to games. He started in industrial design in Cluj, in Romania, and taught at the academy there, and then freelanced and for product and graphic design in Athens before moving to the United States in the early 90s. Once here, he jumped into concept art on Square's Secret of Evermore, and art directed and art direction posts at EA Seattle. And then where we met at Zipper Interactive, working on Crimson Skies and MechWarrior 3, and then to EA Canada, where he helped shape SSX and Need for Speed. Most players will probably be familiar with his work at ArenaNet, where he was the art director and turned Guild Wars into a playable painting, and then created Guild Wars 2 from launch all the way through the living seasons, while overseeing art for all of NCSoft's Western studios, and then eventually globally for NCSoft. He's most recently been doing a lot of consulting and freelance work across the industry. Outside of games, he's done all sorts of really interesting work using his signature space industrial style on the covers of the Expanse novels and the limited edition of the Martian. Valve even borrowed his face for Father Grigori in Half-Life 2. Daniel thinks in worlds, not just in images. And really looking forward to diving in with you about how you keep creating new ones, and the the joys and the frustrations, the sorrows and the of creating the incredible work you've done. So let me start. I'm going to bring up Kevin. If you could bring up that image I sent you. This is so when Daniel and I first met, I had just joined Microsoft, and we were developing the PC game for Crimson Skies, which we worked with Zipper on. And at the time, you were art director for Zipper. And I came into the office after sitting down with you initially and going through all of the board game materials that we'd created, all the work we had done for that, and your office was covered in these gorgeous charcoal sketches that you had done for the world of Crimson Skies, just across the entire world. You were just, we weren't yet doing mission design. You were just exploring the world, and you were nice enough to give me this one, which hangs on my wall still, which is a great piece of Art Deco work, of a very vertical city, which is what Crimson Skies was all about. You made an awesome impression on day one, Daniel, and I've enjoyed our conversations ever since. Thank you so much for joining us here at the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I had completely forgotten this piece, and I'm sure there are many more pieces from that uh, early phase of my career that I'd be hard pressed to recognize. But I'm glad it still holds up reasonably well.
Daniel, I think that something that really struck me as I was prepping for this episode was how your style, and it is a very distinct style, your style has really imprinted on the games industry and fantasy and sci-fi illustration in general. Talk about that a little bit if you could.
Absolutely. I mean, as talking about style is a favorite subject of mine. It's something I really have potentially controversial opinions on, and I'll elaborate. I strongly believe that style is something that should not be uh, fabricated or invented, but rather an organic um, evolution or rather an organic expression of the content. Uh, what I mean by that is uh, I believe strongly uh, in message over visual language. It's the story, the message, the actual content should be what drives the fine tuning of the visual language, and making sure that language serves uh, content, and it's not arbitrary and artificial layered on top of content. Now, why is this controversial? Because, as we know, more often than not in the process of early visual development, we are pressured by executives to uh, basically give them samples of, vertical slices or visual targets of a representative for how the game is going to look when it ships. And my response to that is, we'll know that when the day before we ship, and that is a really scary thought for bean counters, because they like predictability, and rightfully so. So, of course, this statement I'm making, or this position, is to some extent intended to shock, and I usually elaborate on it and say, hey, I can give you an approximation, but with the disclaimer that the look of the game will continue to develop all the way through the dev cycle. We can anticipate with, say, 70-80% degree of accuracy that what the end result is going to look like. But I reserve the right to fine tune, to polish, to adapt,
Yeah.
and to adapt to the changes that and expectations of the market all the way to ship date.
So for those of you out there listening, um, Daniel's talking about something that happens in games, typically in conversations with the publisher, where we may try to create very early on something representative of the final product, and that's something companies use to kind of evaluate and test sometimes. But I think it's an important point that the conversation between art and design and engineering and play testing will sort of naturally shift that over time. Sorry, Jordan, I just wanted to get that in
Yeah,
because
no, I
not
agree. That's
everyone
good.
knows.
I appreciate it. It's good context setting. And I wanted to follow up on it, Daniel, because um I appreciate and agree that the game is going to evolve over time, the look is going to evolve over time, but the farther you go in a game, the less wiggle room there is, right? Just because you have a massive ship where all these assets are being created, right? You've got your initial concept art starts a process of asset creation, which grows in some of the projects you've worked in to be literally armies of artists creating, thousands and thousands of different assets. And so that ability, your ability to change as you go forward becomes more and more limited, right? Just by the nature of how many assets had to have been created by this point in time. So it seems like well, I started my career in the merchant marine, so it's like driving a big ship. Once you get the ship going, it's harder and harder to turn it, right? The faster the ship is moving.
It is harder to turn it, but that doesn't mean you want your wheel frozen or locked.
Yes, agreed.
You
Yeah.
want to have to reserve some room to maneuver because you remember the Titanic. Uh, so
Well,
you
exactly. That's a
I
very
think
good
we've all worked
analogy.
on a few Titanics.
yes we have. So
Well, yeah.
here's another again. These opinions that I have will be controversial, and I'm happy that they provoke a strong reaction. But here's yet another argument for not calcifying the look too soon, or not putting in place guidelines that are too restrictive too early in the dev cycle. I've seen too many games who in where they insisted on putting in place style bibles or style guides uh, really early on, and these style guides more often than not were extremely uh, tight and descriptive and specking out every single possible subtlety of the visual language. And once those were in place, uh, the entire team is urged to stick to these rules. And basically, it has multiple negative side effects. It turns the doers, the artists, into mindless robots on a conveyor belt who are executing on or speaking somebody else's language for the next 3, 4, 5 years, rather than being allowed to contribute and bring their own sensibility to the product. That doesn't help with retention. That doesn't help with their own engagement uh,
Absolutely.
in the dev cycle. And another thing it does, it basically at the end of the production cycle, you have a game that reflects where the market was 3, 4, 5 years ago, and they
Right,
look at it and, oh my God, it looks obsolete. Of course it does, because you
right.
have calcified, hardened that look 5 years ago, and then they rebooted, but they do the exact same thing. They reassess the market expectations and the trends at this new moment in time, and go through that and make that same mistake again of generating yet another new set of guidelines and visual um, uh, language elements. And I've seen games go for 10 years and through 3 or 4 incarnations, where every time it's by the time it ships, it's not up to
Right.
where the industry is at the moment.
I mean,
So
I think that's
go ahead,
so
Jonathan.
interesting because I do, while you were speaking about that, I was kind of reflecting on some of my own dev experiences. And I think there's a variety of different approaches to the art that goes into video games, whether literally the art, or kind of what you're talking about. I see often reflected in audio, where the audio person, the musician, is expected to show up with very little context of the game, produce something that fits in the experience, and then is basically, their work ends and they're kind of like pushed off, like, okay, we're done with you. And because of that, there's a difficulty to get things to gel, whether it is audio, whether it is, I think to a lesser degree, but still, the artwork can suffer from that on some products. And, even the game design, right? We want a shooter that with RTS aspects, but now it's going to be a MOBA. The expectation that as game designers, you can just drop in gameplay and have it work, often is sort of imposed. So I think what you're describing is something sort of chronic in games, and it's also really interesting to hear you describe it in a language that it sounds like you really, you understand the problem set deeply, but you still maybe are prescribing a solution that not everyone signs up for.
Well, I'm gonna push on it for a second because it's I'll play devil's advocate for a moment.
As you often do
You're
whenever I say one of these long rambling questions.
so I mean, I think especially in these giant games, which are you're saying hundreds of people for multiple years, right? And it is really hard to keep that game relevant in art and in gameplay mechanics, because it's a constantly shifting, evolving marketplace. But you also have all these hundreds of people that you need to coordinate their efforts. So as you're evolving over time, right? How do you keep it looking like a cohesive piece? Because you're conducting it's like conducting an orchestra where every instrument you need to be able to, it's kind of like jazz, improvisational jazz at an orchestra scale, right? So talk about how you manage to do that, how you manage to keep the freedom to evolve the look, but yet communicate that and create a cohesive piece out of all those hundreds of people.
Awesome. There's really a couple of things that you brought up that are really close to my heart. But before that, I want to respond to Jonathan really briefly when you said, me prescribing solutions. I would never dare prescribe solutions. Anybody who claims they have solutions and the recipe to succeeding is full of hot air. Never. These are opinions that I put out there for evaluation, for debate, and for people to agree or disagree, and our conversation starters. Now back to what um, Jordan was saying. I use the analogy to the comparison to conducting a whole lot, and the jam session. I also quote this Russian conductor who was the musical director of the Philharmonic in Petersburg, who used to say, "Perfection is guaranteed." Blows your mind. All you've been told all your life is that perfection is something that you pursue get closer, kind of asymptotically closer to it, but never reach it. And he said, no, perfection is guaranteed. That's where my effort as a conductor begins. What does he mean? Technical perfection is something he expects from every single one of his musicians. Any one of them can, you put in front of them the sheet music, and it will execute, with extreme precision on the timing and whatever the pitch of every note. But he says that's where our work begins. It's all about the expression, because just delivering on sheet music is soulless. And it's the storytelling, the imbuing life and soul and emotions into a piece of music. That's what the conductor working with the team adds on top of the sterile sheet music. So to me, that is really, really a huge distinction to make. To me, values are a must. Okay, nowadays are expectations. You have to have them. But production values impress while storytelling moves. It's, again, a hugely important distinction to make. Impressing is
Yeah.
not enough. Impressing, resonates intellectually, or is being processed by the brain through completely different channels than emotional response. And in my opinion, that's where uh, there's still a future for us creatives, because the technical aspects, execution, production values, and all, fidelity will be inevitably, resolved by the machines, the AI and such.
Man, I just love this point because I think that, you know, what I'm hearing, and feel free to correct me, Daniel, is, um, production and the technical execution are performance, but a point of view, the storytelling, um, is of equal, if not more important weight. When you go hear somebody perform Mozart, you don't want to hear a studio reference, right? You want to hear the performance that group, what is their interpretation to a degree? What is it that they're bringing?
Absolutely. It's, another example or argument to make this case is like you see at Costco when they sell those automatic pianos. They play impeccably as far as uh, exactly correctly a piece, yet you'll never see people weeping around the piano that plays by itself, right?
Right.
And on the other end of the spectrum, you'd see in Pike Place Market this old Chinese guy playing the string instrument with just one string, and it just twists your guts. The emotion and the imperfections. Here's another thing. Let's not marginalize and underestimate the beauty of imperfections, and that's
That
what it
Yeah, and
makes.
I wanted to just tie this briefly back into just jump into your background a little bit again because you were born in Cluj, you were born in Romania. Um, I actually was also born in Europe, and so I know a little bit how traditionally you can be educated in certain parts of Europe where you're not necessarily being trained to work in the field that we work in, or really any field that occupies the future. You're mostly being trained really strongly in the past, and yet when and so I saw when researching you before the episode, I saw it seemed like you'd had a really rich, deep education visually, but one that was principally disconnected from a lot of the fields and even, maybe even the techniques that you later used in your career. And I think my assumption is that that's what's led you to develop such a rich, unique style coming, referencing the earlier point, your own performance, what you bring to, the visuals that is so distinct. Do you agree with anything I just said, or am I completely off base?
No, 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 you're not at all off, but uh, basically my style started shaping up when I quit obsessing with the search for style. As most young people do, I went through this phase where I was freaked out and panicking. Oh my God, I'm in my late 20s or 30 and still don't have my ownable style. What am I going to do? How am I going to go about inventing a recognizable, distinctive style? And only when I accepted that it needs to come from, it needs to be a sincere, honest expression of deeper values and interests and passions of mine. And that's when it kind of started shaping itself up. Again, this connection between content and the form of expression, I think, doesn't just apply to teamwork and visual development for a game, but to one's own uh, growth as an artist. Yes, we were trained basically by looking at the past, but that didn't mean that we were um, urged to reproduce or to stick to. It was those were lessons to be applied towards problem solving and to a creative methodology that transcends mediums, or there's great deal of similarities between uh, all branches of design, be it architecture, be it visual arts, be uh, you know, industrial design, be even music and spoken language, and the problem solving that we were taught and urged to adopt basically entails understanding an assignment, understanding a task, deconstructing current solutions down to the elemental building blocks, fully understanding and questioning the role of these building blocks into the whole, into the structure as a whole, uh, and then rearranging the modules, the building bricks, into new structures that are simpler, cleaner, more elegant, more efficient, more cost efficient, and just uh, and these principles you can apply them to pretty much any. Uh, Basically, I use a lot of analogies to spoken grammar that has its morphology and its syntax, and understanding the building blocks is what morphology does for spoken language, and then understanding the syntax is about the relative um, connections and arrangement of these building blocks into a coherent overall sentence. So that's where I go back to um, music as one of the most influential means of expression that have formed my thinking. And I don't know the first thing. I can play a kazoo, but I listen to musicians speak because I think they are extremely eloquent in how they talk about their art, and the fact that they don't resort to imagery allows me to function in at a higher level mentally and understand abstract notions, as opposed to artists who, you know, lazily resort to imagery to illustrate their ideas. You know,
I want to follow up on the subject of style for a moment, because you, as we're talking about as an artist, you found your style when you decided to stop looking for it, right? I mean, as it started to evolve from your passions and not from what you were trying to position yourself into the marketplace, right? But yet a lot of the projects we work on are commercial projects that do need to position themselves into a marketplace. And there is all sorts of influences coming into the style of that product, whether it's a book cover or it's a video game. There is the material itself, right? The fiction of the world itself, as you said, which has to be such a critical component to establishing the look and feel of it. And then there's the need to differentiate visually from an incredibly crowded marketplace. How do you balance those two aspects with your own style and evolution of your own style to bring all those things together into something that serves the purposes of the project?
great question. Before I answer this, I want to respond to something that you said, uh, you know, several minutes ago, where you were talking about these big projects, these big teams. And so I just want to make an observation, and we'll come back to
Yes,
the
absolutely.
big projects, big teams, big budget. Uh, I think is dying. And well, let's get back to this later. Let's not sweep this under the rug. And I'm happy to elaborate on this. So I think it's important for us to focus on how do we adapt to the new realities that basically entail flexibility and agility and face the realities of AI taking over a lot of the production, the grunt work over time, and how our role as creators changes in this new picture. But now going back to your more recent question is, first, I do not insist or do not expect or don't even attempt to have my style uh, uh, imprinted or forced upon a team ever. I always consider that's why 99% of my artwork does not end up in a game, and I don't expect it and I don't want it. My concept art is intended to be the conversation starter, that and I uh, not only allow but expect all contributors to add and build on top of each other's work. So it's super important to me uh, to put in place a culture and and collective approach to development that allows for people to bring their own contribution. And I hand out the concept art and say, hey, meet this and beat this, and the modeler will take it and then give it some thought. And I always tell them, don't even touch pen to paper or any of your tools of your craft until you have a strong opinion or reaction to what I'm proposing. You either love it and understand the spirit of it and are willing to embellish it and enhance it, or you hate it and for good reasons. And I want that reflected in your in the changes you'll be making. And then a texture artist and an animator and a sound person and so on. Continue to basic. Each person who touches an asset should uh, add layers of richness and complexity and storytelling to an asset. And that's why the end result will differ pretty drastically from the starting point. And that's why insist or put a lot of effort into educating up and explaining to the decision makers that we need that flexibility and we need that elbow space to stray away in a good sense, as in develop and evolve the the style over the
Yeah.
duration.
This is something that I really you really got me thinking about in one of your previous answers. You were talking about um, using, the grounding from the past that you had been educated in to sort of build the future and not be trapped or handcuffed to the past, but inspired by it. Something that I'm actually quite afraid of in the current state of games and interactive entertainment, or really entertainment in general, is that we're now, I feel, handcuffed to the present. We can't move forward in some ways because the present narratives, the present style, the present is so dominant. When you look at the dominance of certain types of games that are dominant and have been for a long time, when you look at, I think it's visible in movies as well. The present is so constricting in some ways, that I feel like it's difficult to evolve. What do you think about that statement? What's your take?
Well, I think because all these industries are experiencing this impasse, as I think why it is important for us to step back and realize there's no future in continuing to do sequels to the best to this handful of bestsellers, and just by bumping up production value and the level of noise, and it's important to realize that uh, good moving storytelling is where the future is at, and uh, realize that development is cannot keep up or has already fallen behind the curve of progress in technology. And then art education and education in general is trailing behind development even more. You know, more often than not, art educators are people who have left the industry disgusted by the challenges and restrictions, and are basically teaching methodologies that were valid or current 3, 4, 10 years ago. But in the meantime, things have changed so much, and so uh, you know back to the example I gave you, where my theme to my speech I gave in Morocco was supposed to be the importance of mastering ZBrush and Photoshop and Unreal and Unity and blah blah blah, and for future developers. Well, is it it's part of the equation, but it's not even half. If we focus on technique and mastering the tools, will be uh, basically shortchanging these students, these kids, and fail to equip them with much more difficult things to teach, which are uh, be storytellers, be receptive, and be vulnerable, be observer, become a good observers, and know how to turn their own be open to resonating with the world around us, and learn how to turn these personal experiences into experiences of universal validity. So no, or hardly anybody is realizing that technique alone, teaching technique alone, is putting these kids, future developers, at a disadvantage in competing with fast developing technology, and that we just need to understand that there will be less of a need for, what's the word, proficient users of tools, because AI and machines will take that away.
Well, to use your symphonic analogy before, are you envisioning that the world is is now reduced, the orchestra is reduced to the conductor, right? The technically perfect performers are now automated, and so what's left is the person who's guiding that interpretation, the conductor of the music. Is that kind of where you're seeing things going?
You know, it's conductors will become increasingly more important, but conductors will still need uh, uh, users of instruments capable of uh, getting out of those machines more than they were meant to give. You
Mm.
know, uh, to
So maybe we push one tier farther down to the first chairs, right? The first chair
Right.
violinist, the first chair cellist, the first chair, right? That these are the super senior people who really understand the instruments at incredible depth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
Which is, to be honest, still very scary, right? When you
Yeah.
don't need the fifth chair, the fourth chair anymore. The fourth chair, the fifth chair is sometimes where you create your first chairs.
Well, yeah, and it's how do you learn to be a first chair if you didn't have the years of seasoning as fifth, fourth, third, and second? You know.
I don't know, but in my opinion, I don't know how you achieve and how you reinvent uh, art education and education in general. Uh, but I think the first step in this process is acknowledging the changes
Yes.
in the problem.
It's
Yeah,
interesting though, because when,
ignoring problems rarely makes them go away. Yeah.
yeah,
And I always say, I'm glad that I'm old.
Yeah, I've used that line many, many times as well.
but I think it's interesting in a way because it seems clear to me that we are now at the end of an era of game development that sort of started around 2010, where we went from, in the early periods of the 2000s, we went from a time when if you wanted to get in games, there was no schooling, there was no training. You had to train yourself. You had to kind of sneak your way in. In fact, pretty much everyone from that era that I know tricked their way into game development. Uh, and then we had this period where we had these schools with degree programs that started pumping out graduates. And, we needed them, especially the bigger games really needed large volumes of human capital. Uh, I think the scary thing is, now we need fewer of those people. And we may be heading back to an era where, once again, if you want to be in games, you need to, you know, basically self-educate, or grind or self-season at least. Start with an education, but then self-season, and then grind your way into that first chair, doing a lot of the early career work, frankly, possibly on your own.
On your own. Yeah, I know. That's very much going that way. And I want to pick up on something you said earlier about being captured by the presence. I would actually disagree. I think large projects are captured by the past, right? Because it's very hard to make the business case to spend a huge amount of money in an unknown result. So it's much more comfortable to make that business case based upon previous performance of other titles, which is why, both in all large budget creative works, you see the kind of repetition of successful things, right? Because it's a rare organization and rare individuals who are willing to really take the risk necessary to create new original work.
No,
Uh,
I think we're just violently agreeing, Jordan, because that's what I mean by the present. It's like, if I can only pitch you something that's making money today, uh, you know what I mean? And in a fairly significant way.
That leads oftentimes, or I've seen it in the past, leading to what I call, and I haven't coined the term myself, designed by windsock. You know,
right. I love that phrase.
where you just observe the most recent market trends and constantly change direction based on sales charts. It's not the way to go about it. But before we continue, I want to go back to something we were talking, or you asked half an hour ago, and I feel like I haven't addressed it. You were talking about continuity and how do you ensure continuity, over a long development cycle and with this built-in flexibility in the the stylistic positioning of the game. And my preferred solution for that is rapid prototyping and getting getting to 80% of the result with 20% of the effort, and putting in place a close enough approximation of the experience you want to propose, and putting things into the game, and testing them in, whether focus groups or the colleagues or the team as a whole. But if an idea doesn't hold up in its purest form, most crudest form, stripped of any fluff, if you can't find the fun factor, or it doesn't it doesn't resonate emotionally a story, then no amount of post production and production values will, no amount of polishing
Yeah.
will turn it into a gem.
Yeah, it's something that you and I've separately talked about I mean, at our various companies. We've talked about together. It's so true. Is that production value doesn't save a game. It has to be. You have to prove it's fun long before you spend all the money on the production value.
Right. I call it concentric development. You need to have a core experience that is fun in its absolute ap- purest form, stripped of any flaw. And if that gameplay experience will get people in the room screaming and laughing and swearing and reacting strongly, then it's worth investing in building the onion skins around it.
I think absolutely love that phrase, and I think it's very true. And you can see, companies like Nintendo, which very much embrace that, right? It's you don't start by designing a Mario game. You start by designing lots of games, and then you find one that earns itself to become a Mario game.
Right. I've seen, or I've been part of too many dev cycles where they took this kind of waterfall, or approach to validating an idea, where, hey, here's a script, what does everybody think, well, it's nothing to write home about, if you ask me. Yeah, but I think the next step will take it there, which is what? Well, let's storyboard it, and then you'll see a storyboard. Yeah, kind of get it, but still not really pulling at the strings of my heart. Well, let's do an animatic, and let
Mm.
then just and then 20 approvals later, you're still left with something that's lukewarm, and everybody's like, still not doing much for me. Yeah, but you've approved all the 20 steps.
And now we have to ship it because we spent a lot of money on it.
Exactly. So here's another thought. As far as where does AI come in handy, or what in my opinion, two areas where I'm hoping AI will make a difference is personalization versus localization. You know, in this effort of globalizing success, or transcending cultural boundaries and geographic boundaries. Uh, Historically, the only solution was localization, which in my opinion is dumbing down the game to its the lowest common denominator based on some stereotypes, like white people or Westerners like this, out of that audience, guys like this, and through age groups and such, and basically offering solutions that don't offend but don't really appeal to the individual either. In my opinion, AI can help a great deal reading who I am as a user based on analyzing my shopping history and literally looking like who I am as an individual, and wherever possible appealing to my preferences. I think there's a huge opportunity there.
I have to admit I'm on two minds of that one because I certainly see how if you're effectively designing on the fly to build it around the individual, it could potentially in a world where that's magically good be a lot more meaningful to that individual, but it also completely destroys the social aspect of gaming because now we don't have a shared experience, right? We've created
No, no, no,
the
no. We
tower of
do, we do. I just oversimplified the model. So I'll elaborate some more. Say, in 2 jobs ago, I was put in charge of, helping or kind of directing the NCSoft development efforts towards global success. And it occurred to me that, hey, first, it's a quasi impossible task because of the vast cultural differences. But uh, thinking about it, I realized, hey, we have a hemisphere with its preferences, and the other hemisphere with its own preferences and history, and really deeply rooted and calcified. But there is an area of overlap. There are certain values of global validity. And building the tree trunk or the spinal cord of the main story within that area of overlap, but the bulk of a massive MMORPG, for instance, happens outside of that, and there is side quests and the bazillion interactions, and that's where I think personalization can make
yeah.
a big difference.
Okay, that
One,
that I can agree with. Kind of the 80-20 or 70-30, right? Where we have enough of a shared experience
exactly,
that we can communicate, we can emote together, we can experience and discuss what we've learned, and then actually the differences I think become positive, right? Because
exactly,
then you're contributing to the conversation things that I've seen that you haven't. As long as we have to have that common shared trunk.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the main. That's the tree trunk. Everything else are the branches and the foliage. So
Well, when you think about, I mean, this is a common area of labor inside games, especially ones that are transmedia properties, right? Is okay, you're making a Dune MMO, you're on Arrakis, you're crafting to survive, but the people that you meet there, the characters that you meet there, the little micro stories and conflicts that build up the hours of play that take you through the main story. Those could be more variable is kind of sounds like what you're saying.
exactly, that's exactly what I'm saying. And now going back to another area where this is really kind of daydreaming or hoping high, is that maybe AI will help with creating models, and I'm not talking models, but models of outcomes of certain decisions. In my opinion, one area where I've experienced most frustration, especially on big projects, is the unwillingness of executives to stick their neck out. And this obsession with predictability and wanting to make sure that they don't take risky decisions that may jeopardize their jobs and so on. And all they can rely on is some marketing research and instincts, and some of them don't have the instincts or the experience to trust themselves. And having AI uh, uh, buttress those instincts, or help people, very much like weather forecasts. Hey, what if we were to do this? What are the possible outcomes? Uh, and fine tune these algorithms over time to where they can kind of at least with some level of accuracy, um, provide
A
some
confidence marker.
confidence mark. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that.
There's I have to get on my soapbox for a second and say something that's really important to me in games and creativity in general, and I think is not well understood or not well highlighted. The rigor and the brutality of the approval process that a large corporate organization can put on a creative enterprise doesn't just hamper it in terms of making you spend more money. It also perverts the creative process. And I think, as creators, you find your skills growing in the direction of not delighting the player, but clearing the green light meetings. And they're two totally different skills. And I think, certainly something that's plagued me in my career is there was a time where I got really good at clearing green lights. But when I looked at what I'd actually built, once I got past the green light, it wasn't enough to delight the player at all. And I see that. You can see that in products today that have shipped it and made it to the marketplace. I can almost see where they cleared the green light meeting, and then the movie or the game sucks.
You're absolutely right. But what is even worse, as a doer, what's more frustrating than the rigor of and the harshness of decisions is lack of decisions. And
Yes.
indecision, I think, is even more damaging and paralyzing, because at the end of the day, decisions are constraints that you know you face in any design process. If you have to accept certain guardrails and boundaries, and it is what it is. I have to function within this cage. But a complete lack of decisions, and this unwillingness to take a position, or uh, be open to dialogue with constructive intentions, is even worse. It's absolutely disorienting for the doers.
Mm.
And it consumes a huge amount of budget of the
Oh
project.
yeah, I mean,
That was the biggest thing, after I spent the first 20 years of my career working for myself, in small companies, and then had a decade of working at large companies. And that was the biggest thing, the biggest difference, right? When you're in a small company, you don't have the luxury of not making a decision, right? You have to make decisions quickly. You try to do it with the best information you have available, and then you just have to move on, right? Because you can't stay in that stasis mode. But large organizations, there's an incentive by the nature of being, of your position within it, to not make decisions, right? And I don't think, often it's misunderstood how costly not making a decision is. I started to develop a technique where I would start every meeting by saying, at the end, you'll be asked to make these decisions. And this is the cost of not making a decision today, right? We will run up a bill of X $100,000 each week that this decision is delayed, and we won't actually be making a better game because of it, right? And it's kind of an invisible tax on a product, on a development, and it can be quite huge.
Yeah, and part of the reason for this correlation between size and unwillingness to make decisions is the fact that a small company is a much flatter structure. There's no ladder to be climbed, or hardly any. So people are a lot more willing to make risky decisions because it's not affecting their long-term ambitions of getting to the top of the pyramid as much.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, the decisions you make can affect whether you have a company or not next week. So, but, but they're, I think you would just realize at a small company, you don't, I think the dynamic you're talking about is absolutely true. And also you just realize we don't have the ability to delay, right? That you're much more in touch with the costs of what's taking place because you're seeing it every day. And so you by nature then realize, okay, we have to make a decision, even if it's wrong, right? And I think that's to your point. A bad decision is better than no decision, right? Because a bad decision can be, you can, go back and revise it, and you will have learned something through moving forward, even on something that failed. You'll have learned something versus
Very
sitting in stasis, you learn nothing,
absolutely, but revising a bad decision is a lot less costly if you subscribe to the methodology of rapid prototyping.
Absolutely.
Fail
Yeah.
fast, fail cheap is something we hear a lot. Yet few development houses have really put their money where their mouth is in this.
Daniel, I wanted to ask you something, kind of harkening back to some of the earlier points you've made. You're somebody who really found traction in the games industry and in culture. Um, I think, with a certain deck stacked against you, right? Coming from a portion of Europe that didn't necessarily have as much of a strong history in these properties or these products, at least when you first got your start. Obviously things have changed, but if you can imagine you were that same person you were in your late 20s, with a strong fundamental background in the arts, and design. Imagine you were that person again today. What would you do? What would with all the challenges that we just talked about, what would be your approach?
I don't know that I'd want to be 20 again for a number of reasons. First, challenges for somebody who's young they'll be facing, to me, seem a lot more intimidating. Second, at 20, I thought I knew it all. I had it all figured out. At 30, I thought of my 20 years old version of myself as an idiot. And that process of kind of reassessing who you were 10 years ago continues throughout your life. Uh, what I did have and what I still have to a great extent was energy and the willingness to just jump headfirst into things and move mountains. I haven't lost that, and that is one quality that I think helped me a great deal. But it wasn't what, and also over time, and increasing willingness to accept the relativity of my values and opinions. You know, I thought a lot more stronger about my opinions when I was 20 or 30 or so on. And, the older I get, it's like, I know that I'll be looking back at this conversation we had 10 years from now and sort of wonder what I was thinking. Uh,
Yeah,
uh,
the surety of youth, right? That conviction that you figured out the whole universe is also is a powerful thing, right? I mean, that's why so much creation gets placed, gets made by then, because you're too naive to realize that it can't be done, so you just do it.
yeah,
And
it's one of the few quotes that from the Bible that I ever use as I think this is what it means when it says, ignorance is bliss. Uh,
Yeah.
yes,
Well,
because
exactly.
it equips you with this, you know, energy and decisiveness and willingness to tackle everything head first. So,
Yeah.
but this is also something that I like to remind less experienced people in any industry, but particularly a creative one, about as well. Something one of our previous guests, Kevin Hanna, and I talk a lot about, which is yes, the person with the audacity to charge across the battlefield and jump into the enemy trench and win, yes, they are a hero, but make sure that you also look across the path they took and see all the corpses who didn't make it.
Yeah, it's basically a real life version of was it Meat Boy? You just watch the thousands of corpses,
Right.
versions of you that didn't make it on the way. Super Meat Boy, I think it was what. Yeah,
Super Meat
versions of you
Boy.
that didn't
Yeah.
make it. But that is very true, and I think as we said earlier, the downside of these incredible tools that are coming to the forefront is the impacts they're going to have on so many people's in the industry. The upside is they also empower you to make incredible things by yourself. There's going to be so much bland content generated, right? We're just going to be buried under a tsunami of really bad content and very bland content. And,
Slop, as the kids say.
yeah.
always
And, but, as you said, Daniel, and I think we all agree, right? The, the ones that really have great stories, the ones that come from the heart, that come from your passion, right? That's the only way to separate yourself out from that tsunami, from that tidal wave of slop.
it's why paintings from 30,000 years ago still hold up and move you, while the most high fidelity, ZBrush model that you see in a game may do nothing for you.
Yes. So true. And
So
that's a great analogy and great statement.
could we I think we're running a little bit long on time, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but could we take a second to do something a little bit fun, or at least fun for me?
And that's what's important after all. Sure.
Kevin, can you bring up that image? So I'm going to be a fanboy for a second, Daniel, and just say, I love this book, Leviathan Wakes, by James S.A. Corey, who's actually two authors, not one person. But this is your cover, right, Daniel?
I did all their covers from
All
the
their covers. Okay.
all
S-
the
So
plus collector's edition, and then they split up and started their kind of solo careers and wrote a couple of books, and I did those, and now they reunited and started a new IP under the same name, and I'm doing the current series.
awesome. Wow. The thing I'll just say is, like, I saw this book cover from across the bookstore. I literally did not know until, when I started researching you for the pod, that you were the artist. But I saw the cover from across the bookstore and I was like, oh, I'm going to like that book. I just had an immediate, strong, visceral response, which absolutely paid off. in the book itself, and it's been a hit TV show as well. Can you just tell us a little bit about what goes into either making this specific cover or making any of the covers that you make for their novels?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying uh, these two guys, Ty and Daniel Abraham, Ty Frank and Daniel Abraham, are really, really smart and really fun guys and
Yeah.
open-minded collaborators. And it's the most satisfying uh, collaborative effort that I've been involved with. And the way it works is they'll commission a cover before they have written the book. And I'm like, come on, give me something to work with. And then they'll literally throw at me, a short paragraph, 2 or 3 sentences at best. And they're like, you know what? We trust you. You haven't failed us in the past. Just do something. And they do it on purpose because uh, they say that to some extent it informs where they take certain aspects of their writing. I'm not saying that they reverse engineer their story from my covers, but certain nuances apparently they extract from the artwork and infuse into their writing. And there is no approval process. Not ever once have they come back and said, "Hey, we were thinking more like this or more like that." Never. Every time they just give me a couple of sentences, and 2 3 weeks later, I deliver the cover and kind of biting my nails. What are they gonna say? And without exception, they approve them as they were. So it's really a great uh, experience as a freelancer.
Wow, that's awesome.
Wonderful. Yeah, they are
Yeah,
really. I've only met him a couple times, but really, I've found to be the same. They're really, really fun guys. and uh, and one of them is an incredible BattleTech fan. He like, immediately approached me and goes, "Hey, on this mech, why is the heat sinks really short?" And he's it's like, wow, okay,
Ty is a hardcore. He knows more about role playing than most.
yeah, yeah. It was really fun to talk to.
they sound like great future friends of the pod.
Yeah, we should totally get him on. I think that would be a blast. Well, Daniel, thank you. This has been an absolutely precious conversation. Really love being able to dive into controversial and interesting statements and pull out of your head all the incredible thoughts you've had that's guided an amazing career.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And again, take it all with a grain of salt.
So for our viewers, you should definitely check out Daniel's ArtStation. I think that's right, Daniel. Yeah, check out his ArtStation. We've been showed some of the pieces from that on the pod today. Check it out. It's a wealth of incredible images that are, clearly, I think, in your style, Daniel, but are just really varied and show all the
Inspiring, really, really inspiring. Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. Anywhere else that we should check out your work, Daniel, or is it mostly ArtStation?
It's ArtStation, but I would urge people to click on those icons because all those thumbnails open a series of 3 4 5 images from that thematically fall into the same category. So there's a lot more, yeah, in
Yeah.
under any of.
Yeah. That's incredible depth of work.
So we'll link to that directly in the show notes. So if you're watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast app, you can check out that link. And yeah, learn more about Daniel and his work because chances are he's been a significant influence on probably several properties that you love. Thank you, Daniel. Again, I like it. Your thoughts, I think, are it's so cool to see somebody who's had so much experience in creating great entertainment who's still thinking about, you know, the future and how to adapt and how to change and how to grow. So thank you for sharing all your thoughts today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a great pleasure.
Okay, well, thank you to our listeners also. We really appreciate you. We would love to hear comments, feedback, likes, reviews, and something we're absolutely looking forward to is finding guests that you guys are excited about. So, any guest suggestions, please send them our way. Any feedback on the direction of the pod or things you'd like to see us dive deeper into, please also send those our way. And just thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Jordan for co-hosting, and thank you again, Daniel.